The opening of the G77 plus China Third South Summit was graced by presidents and other heads of delegation at Peak Resort Munyonyo. The summit brings together 77 of mostly developing countries in China following its establishment in 1964. At the event, Cuba handed over the chairmanship of the summit to Uganda, with President Yoweri Museveni receiving the baton. Addressing the summit as the new chair, President Museveni called for solidarity and unity to steer the group.
We must continue to embrace the founding principles that gave life to this heterogeneous and representative group of nations.
Museveni emphasized the importance of regional blocs as a vehicle for development.
As developing countries, we should support the implementation of these regional trade blocs. We must also support strengthening triangular cooperation. Leaving no one behind cannot be realized without adequately addressing the challenges and needs faced by countries in special situations, in particular African countries, least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states.
The president also cautioned member states against seeking financial help from international financial institutions which attach unrealistic conditions.
In our view, the international financial institutions and multilateral development banks must support the national priorities of developing countries without any conditionalities that infringe on these countries' sovereignty.
Speaking to journalists, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called for reforms, especially the international financial institutions, to accommodate the needs of developing countries, which he says are still victims of the colonial system.
Obviously, those institutions have been more attentive to the needs of the global north than to the needs of the global south. And there is an increase of inequality that needs to be quickly corrected. That is why we have been asking for the reform of the institutions, to make them exactly adapted to the reality of today's economy, for an adequate representation, namely Africa, and at the same time for a set of measures in relation to debt relief.
He also singled out injustice to the African countries, especially when it comes to representation to the critical bodies of the UN, like the UN Security Council, where no African country has a permanent representative.
I'm hopeful that at least a partial reform of the UN Security Council could be possible for this flagrant injustice to be corrected and for Africa to have at least one permanent member in the Security Council. It is not guaranteed, nothing that of course depends on the Secretary-General, it depends exclusively on member states.
Speaking about the Gaza conflict, the Secretary-General didn't hold back on slamming the double standards in observing international law, calling for an immediate ceasefire.
The rules are international humanitarian law, and we cannot have double standards. And for us it's clear that we are seeing in Gaza a violation of those rules, namely of international humanitarian law, and that situation needs to be corrected.
Asked about Uganda's anti-homosexuality law, Guterres maintains that human rights of minorities must be respected.
It is critical to uphold the basic human rights of every person, regardless of background, race, religion, sexual orientation, or political opinion. So my position is, in relation to this, very clear, and it's based on the principle of non-discrimination that must be respected by every country.
In a bid to fight poverty among its member states and enhance economic development, China called for the appointment of a special envoy for the summit to lead the fight against poverty. Ali Mevole, NTV.